good evening, one and all, and welcome to White House Vibes. I want to apologize for the late start, but I think you're going to agree with me that at the end of our interaction, you're going to realize that, well, here comes another brother, man. Let me add him now. Yes, brother, at the end of this show, as I was saying, I think you're going to really enjoy it because we have a special guest today. A brother man who is from the struggle of the Jamaican people and gonna share some ideas and his thought with us. You know. But before we get into that, let me say this. With me today, like myself, are brothers who I would say we are activists. We defend the poor and look out against injustice, whether in Jamaica. Oftentimes, when we talk about defending the poor of Jamaica, you know, most of the ideas we draw liberation movement, especially in Jamaica, is one where are coming out of Europe. Sometimes it work for us and sometimes it work against us. These European ideas that we import into the Jamaican. Rex Nettleford once said, Jamaica, we need to develop something called simiization. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it correct, but what I get from what he was saying is that we need ideas and what have you, ideas coming from the bottom, to influence and carry forward progress in Jamaica. This Sunday evening, I have with me Brother Abika Gray, a brother man who I think has a good like within the so-called ghetto communities, the working class communities in Jamaica. All these communities manage, control, and the different forces that impact the lives of people who live in this zone. My name is Michael Nita. I'll be hosting this discussion alongside Brother John Harton, Brother Las Crawford, and Brother all of us come from out of Kingston, Jamaica. And as I said, we've been fighting a long time in the trench to bring better to our people. At some discussion, I expect to be joined by Sister Maxine. I want to hear her ideas. So
And you also expect
while
to
we
be
wait on
joined
her,
by
John, why don't you introduce the brother man to the listeners? You know,
Okay, so
Go ahead and
I want
introduce him, John.
yes, I just going to read what he sent me. Obika Gray is his name, is Professor Emeritus at the University of Wisconsin. I don't know what the last piece there, Obika, you can tell me.
All clear.
Oh, clear.
Yeah.
Where he specializes in comparative politics of the global south. He's a graduate of St. Andrew Technical High School, Long Island University, Brooklyn Center, and the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor, where he earned his doctorate in political science. Gray was a professor of political science at Vassar College in Poughkeepsie, New
Poughkeepsie.
York,
Mhm.
for many years, and in 2013 to 14 was professorial fellow at the Sir Arthur Lewis Institute of Social and Economic Studies at the University of the West Indies in Mona. Gray has published widely on Jamaican politics and is most recently the author of Demeaned But Empowered: The Social Power of the Urban Poor in Jamaica. He's currently working on another book, Challenges to Coloniality: The Study of Radical Intellectuals 1960 to 1990. So with that, on that note, I would like to welcome Abika, who so happens to live near me, meaning in the same city, and we're beginning and have become friends over the last year and a half, I would say. So Abika, welcome, sir. Thank you for coming again. And you may want to say a little bit more about your own roots from Jamaica.
Right, right. Well, I appreciate the invitation to share perspectives on our country. My own biography is that I was born at Rum Lane down in Kingston there. That would be what, East Kingston, right? And then I really didn't know who my father was. So I was not raised by my mother either. I was raised by a relative, her sister, my aunt. And they were upwardly mobile. And the husband, my sister's, my aunt's husband, won the Irish sweepstakes in 1959 and became a rich man. But that didn't last very long because wine, women, and song had bad friendship, eat up all of that money. So the poor lady had to leave Jamaica with our 6 children by herself, and that's how I came to America. As one of the 6 children that is my aunt brought with her to the United States. Went to cold Boston, didn't like it, very unfriendly. So we came back to New York City, and from there I just worked part time and went to school, and got a degree in journalism and then one in political science. And I just retired about 7 years ago, and I'm down here in Orlando with a wonderful library, catching up on my reading, continuing my education, and hoping to say something more about the Jamaican intellectuals, the radical intellectuals in Jamaica. So that's my third and final book. I had another one called Radicalism and Social Change in Jamaica, which was looking at, again, radical movements of that kind. So my intellectual interests are social movements, how change happens, and who are these forces, and what kind of ideas and ideologies they offer for emancipation in that part of the world.
Interesting.
So I understand you wanted me to talk about that book called Demeaned But Empowered. All right. Um, I enjoyed writing that book because I wanted to I wanted to read a book like that. How is it possible for people who are unemployed, chronically uneducated, marginalized, scorned, viewed with contempt, are so either feared or in some other ways have to be either attacked or accommodated or bought off in some way to keep them quiet? Usually we think of power in Jamaica as coming from the state, and there's no question about it that state power is very, very strong everywhere we look. But they don't have all the power. And in Jamaica, we have a classic case where um, the power had to be shared. with this rebellious and outlaw group, certainly urban Jamaica and certainly Kingston and St. Catherine, but other places, where big power, state power, had to accommodate the little power, what I call the social power. There's a big distinction between political power, exercising political power, which is what the politicians do in every state, and social power, which is what they don't monopolize. And usually, social power is held by groups outside of the state, working class, peasants, urban poor, lumpen, you name it. You just have to find it in that particular society. So I wanted to investigate this paradox of a group that is demeaned, held in racial contempt, regarded as bugoyaga, and all of the epithets that we know about what they say about the black poor in Jamaica, worthless. I'm not going anywhere. We know all of those
Terms.
yeah, all of those slurs, right? All of those slurs. So how come then you're so contemptuous of them, but you have to not only accommodate them, but bring them into the corridors of power? So that is the Jamaican story since independence. Patron clientelism, which is what we call it in academia. You have a patron who have the money, the land, the connections, the influence, and the power, and the clients coming back from medieval days where you had the king and the serfs. Well, in the former slave societies of the Caribbean, you have the patron, the landowner, busher, and those people who depend on him. So patron clientelism then becomes the way in which democracies is exercised in Jamaica. So what I was trying to understand is that how is it possible that you need the power of the poor people, and especially the power of the lumpen, because the lumpen is a particular category of the poor, and quite often they are the most militant, the most troublesome, the most outlaw, and the ones without any respect for dominant norms. So yet we have in Jamaica a situation since independence and even before where the alienated, isolated urban poor are brought into the corridors of power. And when I say the corridors of power, they don't sit in parliament, but they protect the garrisons. They are critical for making sure that there's no democratic competition in Jamaica, in urban Jamaica, in those poor neighborhoods that we know, several garrisons. So it's a quite an ironic situation where the middle class brown people of Jamaica felt it necessary, even on a Mike on Father Manley, Norman Manley, who was seen as the icon of respectability, the icon of high levels of sophistication and cultural knowledge. Yet when he was prime minister, under him we had the garrisons. The garrisons is not something that just began under Siaga, as a lot of people like to blame Eddie Siaga. That was there before. Uh, all Eddie did was refine the technique which was coming in from the late colonial period. So what everybody knows is that the gangs control the constituencies in certain urban neighborhoods, and they're critical to the reproduction of power. And what the book tried to describe is the way in which the urban poor exercise social power in Jamaica in competition with the political power of the state and of the politicians. And the book describes one particular dominant expression of that social power, which is what I call badness honor. Badness, we know what that is, where you misbehave, you ignore the norms of the society, you criminalize activities, you mock respectable bourgeois norms. And as you know, in Jamaica, our brown middle class, our business class, even our rural poor value respectability, value those Victorian norms that were handed down from the colonial power, valued uh, God fearing behavior. And that has been the dominant identity that has been offered to the Jamaican population. that if you want to reach somewhere in life, you not only have to go to school and to church, but to behave like a respectable bourgeois. Well, that did not happen in the slums of Kingston and elsewhere outside of Kingston. Namely, we didn't have any respectable behavior there, and so the government cracked down first on the Rastafarians over in Montego Bay, and then cracked down on the urban ghettos by beating up Rastas, beating up poor people, and where they can beat them up, then they recruited them as enforcers for the constituencies that they wanted to prevent any democratic competition. So badness honor is a peculiarity of most modern societies where people are left behind. And by badness honor, I'm referring to a type of expression of yourself as not to be messed with, as somebody who must be feared, and somebody with a certain amount of power. And that usually is personal power, the power of the gun, the power of the machete, the power of the tongue, the ability to curse, the ability to frighten, the ability to intimidate others who might be a potential threat to you. And so, if those of us who know the Jamaican bad words, the use and facility of using bad words is a expression of that badness. And badness is not unique to the poor and downtrodden. It is available to the better off classes as well, as any rum drinker meeting a middle class person at a bar in Kingston or St. Andrew will hear the amount of bad word popping out in these places and the amount of aggressiveness that brown people can show for people who are less fortunate than them or to each other. So badness is not something peculiar to the Jamaican poor or to the poorer classes, but it tends to be exaggerated or promoted in places like Jamaica, where you have clientelism, this patron clientelism, the handout business. It tends to be aggravated in a society like the Caribbean, where you have politicians recruiting these downtrodden people, this lumpen proletariat and unemployed element, into the political process as gendarmes. But not only that, informers, giving them political tasks of one kind or another, giving them motorbike, giving them somewhere to live and all of that. And then you have a small island mentality where the culture is face to face with the modern television and high tech um, societies like the United States, Western Europe, and Asia. We didn't have that in the 60s and 70s. Most of the communication was face to face, landline telephone, and direct communication using not reading or writing, but talking. So it's a small scale society, it's an island society. Everybody know everybody else. And the level of intimacy is such that gossip travels very far. And when people want to diminish anybody's reputation, then gossip is the way you do it. And there's no greater place for gossiping than in the ghettos of Kingston and urban areas in Jamaica, because people live by cheek to jowl in these tenement yards. At least they used to, and still do. Many of them do. And so what you find out is that badness honor becomes a strategy to protect your self-respect from other people who may not do so. And that may include politicians, it could include the big man, but it can include your neighbor who is at the standpipe and will move and not allow you to wash your clothes. So what I've described in that book is the ways in which a group of people who lack political power can exercise some social power over politicians, over each other poor people, or over the very wealthy people. Let me stop there and see if you want to follow up on this in any way.
What period does that book covers?
It
I
covers.
think I should.
Yeah, go ahead. Who was saying something?
I had asked the question.
Oh yes, yes. It covered the late 50s to about 1989.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that era. But it concentrates on the late 50s, the 60s, and the 70s, which is the high point of this kind of behavior. Of course, it has morphed and continued in new ways, but I'm talking about the golden age
Okay.
of badness, what I call badness honor. And of course, the honor side of what I'm talking about, because not only badness, is badness in the service of self-respect, is badness in the service of getting your dignity acknowledged by the powerful as well as the powerless. And so, in a place where you have competitive individualism, right, where everybody wants to make a mark in this world, and you do that through a career, you do that through artisanry, you make something, you display something, you create something as a mark of self-respect in the society. And where Black people and people who are Black and poor are not respected, then badness becomes a way to wrest that respect from people at your level as well as the higher ups. And my discussion is to show that the politicians have a lot of power, but they have to bargain with the urban poor. They have to bargain with the gangsters whom they help to create. They have to bargain with the outlaws. And where they can't bargain, as we know, they will kill them.
Abika, I noticed you
Let
mentioned.
me say this. Full disclosure. Can you hear me, Abika?
Yeah, you're cutting in and out, but
Abika, can you hear me?
yes, I can.
Okay. I am from Waterhouse.
Yes.
And when this book came out, it still is, you know, I have a copy of the book
Wonderful.
here. But in my first question to you is, much of the information that you gather as related to Sandokan,
Mm-hmm.
remember that character?
Mm-hmm.
Much of the information you gather came from the newspaper, right?
Yes.
Did you actually engage people from the community when looking at Sandokan and what happened with that guy?
No, I didn't speak to the people in the community, but I speak to the father, the Catholic priest that was in Jamaica at the time, Father
Father Albert.
Father Albert, right?
Albert.
Right, Father Albert.
Albert.
And
Father Albert.
right.
All right.
And Father Albert knew
Well-
Sandokan, and Father Albert was the one who gave me the letter that I
Okay.
cited in the book. So, and I spoke to political people.
Well, I want to say to you that
Go ahead.
brother man,
Yes.
I want to suggest that you go back to that letter. Go back to that letter, and there are some corrections that you need to make in this book. Right?
Go ahead. Let me know. Let me hear you.
The incident that you refer to.
With the police?
The date that you cite in your book. Yeah, the date that you cite in your book.
Yes.
November. Let me just.
The date that I got was the date on the letter.
November 19. November 19. But the incident happened the 18th. The police went to her house, and there was a confrontation there, which led later in the evening led to the assault on the police station.
Yes.
Okay. Next, Sandokan was no done in Waterhouse.
Right.
He was
right.
no done. He was known as a Don in Waterhouse.
He was not known.
What they did is to create what they did is to create a narrative about this young man.
Mm-hmm.
And they did that because the incident happened because of police corruption.
Mm-hmm.
Police corruption. That is what caused the conflict. In fact, I was in the neighborhood that Tuesday evening
Mm-hmm.
when the incident happened.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I would suggest that you go back to that letter and compare the dates that you have here. It's not correct.
Okay, all right. So the date that I'm using, well, the date that I use,
My reading. No, you're using the 19th. The incident happened on the 18th.
okay,
In,
well, all
you
right. I
see
will go
that
back
in
and look.
Sandokan letter.
I'll go back and look at the letter and the dates that I use and take your point into consideration. I didn't realize that there was a discrepancy. I'm trying to understand
see,
it all. Go ahead.
The badness and the honor. The badness and the honor that you point to.
Yes.
My question, is it because of the tradition of resistance in Jamaica, going from Three Finger Jack to Dudus, that history?
Yes, yes. But
You
guess
think
what?
that is what is causing this?
Yes, yes. There's a history of defiance, of which this is part of that tradition. But one of the things that struck me is that the most defiant people, which are these people that we're talking about, were not interested in carrying out a revolution in Jamaica. They were not trying to seize the state by armed struggle, but they engage in this thing called badness honor, which is a form of defiance, a form of resistance, a form of challenge to bourgeois norms and values, and a way of saying that we are going to express this identity of otherness that's going to strike fear into your heart, not just because I carry a gun, but because of how I whine in the dance hall. And I flaunt my sexuality. Because badness honor is not a male thing only. It's also women do it from the slums as well. When they engage in that outlandish expression of bodily bodily fame. Slack, you know the term slackness that we use, right? That's another side of the book. That's another, and I covered it in the book. Another side of the badness honor thing.
Yeah.
That slackness is something that frightens the middle class because it means that we're going back to barbarism, we're going back to the primitive days, and we can't have that. So we denounce slackness in the slums, but we don't have anything to say about it at carnival time.
That's because certain other people do it.
Yes, it's a class thing, as we know, it's a class thing. And if you look deeply into the middle class, brown people's private lives and private interior lives, you'll see they have a lot in common with the misbehavior among the poor. Now, don't get me. I think some of my colleagues, in reading this book, think that I'm writing on the behalf of the poor, that I'm defending their behavior. And that is something that I don't want to be misinterpreted as doing. I'm a scholar, so I have to write about what I see and the kinds of peculiarities that I bring to your attention. But the mere fact that I describe something and show how the powerful class has to accommodate the powerless is no endorsement of the bad behavior of those people who are alienated.
One of the things I noticed you just said, which is very interesting, Abika,
Yes.
is that the most the most militant and some of the most disruptive and some of the most resistant people, they were not actually fighting for better in the system.
Right.
And the history of the politics, especially in Kingston and most of the urban areas in Jamaica, has shown that most of these voices and most of these resistance has been co-opted into the system to help and fight against the resistance that is trying to create change within
Right.
the system,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
which is it is very ironical that the most militant amongst us were not the most militant for beneficial change
Yeah. Yeah.
within the country.
Absolutely. Right. But again, they have only limited resources, right? They're living under desperate circumstances. So we can't expect them necessarily to imagine an alternative which would would be far better. They have better must come. They know they want better, but they don't have the social experience and the class experience to imagine what that would be looking like. But they have always been our tutors about the fact that what the current system is corrupt. It has not helped the black majority, and it has only caused chaos and mayhem in this country since independence right down to the present. So yes, you're absolutely right, and I cover that in the book, that the politicians decide that one way to deal with them is to co-opt them, give them motor car, give them housing to live, give them a money, and give them guns, and have them become hirelings for the party. But in doing that, they also have to accommodate and give a certain amount of autonomy to the dons that rule those constituencies. So the dons and the people in those neighborhoods who are rebellious have a certain amount of autonomy, relative independence from the party for whom they work. And as I said, in some cases, you have one man will for part of the time become a gunman for a party. At another moment, that same man will be licking a pipe in a Rastafarian uh, community. And yet again, that person might carry out a criminal act, bank robbery, hold up, whatever. So this is the kind of a phenomenon that we're dealing with, where one and the same person can be occupying all of those roles, costing the politicians, working for them, and carrying out criminal acts against their own people.
And
and
that,
yet in this hold on last yes, and yet in this current debate, budget debate that is happening in Parliament,
Mm-hmm.
both sides, the PNP and JLP, reform, because much of what you speak of and you point to get nurtured in our prison system,
Yes.
in the
Yeah.
GP.
Yeah. But you know,
And we're not hearing no call for reform.
no, nobody's saying I'm going to unilaterally give up my garrison. You ever hear that yet? No. We can have as many Dudices as possible. We can have the United States come down and take him. But the structures, the institutions remain, because they don't want to do it. And they both agreed that it will not, they won't close down the garrisons. And that is why we have this bizarre setup in Jamaica, where you have a nominal democracy. People can go and vote every 4 or 5 years, but nothing changes substantially for the better. And what the form of government in Jamaica, while it has democratic features, the Creole brown people, them who have been running this thing, are an interesting bunch too, because on the one hand, they come out of the Eurocentric culture and socialization, where they think whiteness is better than blackness, where they believe that the West is superior to Africa and the non-Western world, where they believe that proper manners is whether you went to school or not. These kinds of Eurocentric notions. And but there are also people from the Caribbean who were discriminated against by the racist colonial system. So their thing was not to become so anti-black as to be disgusting to the ordinary Jamaican. So they have to defend blackness up to a point, and their blackness is their defense of black nationalism is highly constrained. Them don't have no time for black power. Them don't have no time for Rasta, except touristic folk entertainment, but not the powerful, deep dread spirit and dread culture that the Rastafarians represent. So we have these people who straddle. They straddle, on the one hand, the Eurocentric sensibility that they brought down through generation. They went to Oxford, Cambridge, UA, top schools, and they used to speak like Father Manley, that kind of clipped, European accent. Because we never heard Father Manley speak patois. If you heard him speak patois, you must point me to it. But even as they carry out the Eurocentric outlook, there are also black people, brown people who suffered the slings and arrows of colonialism and their ancestors' slavery. So they have to defend South Africa at the UN, which they did to their credit I think it was 1960 at the UN. They spoke up on behalf of South Africa. But they have a dark side to them, these brown middle class Jamaicans, which we all know. And I hope to go into that in some detail because I don't think we have a good study of the inner life of the Jamaican middle class, primarily brown people.
What I'm looking
John,
at,
let me hear from. Let me, hold on. Just a minute, Let's welcome Sister Maxine to discussion. Maxine, you good?
Yes.
Welcome.
Yeah, greetings.
Continue, lass.
yeah, this
Greeting. Lass, continue.
this Hannah badness thing that you talk about, Abika,
Mm-hmm.
it is creating a big problem for the system right now in their so-called fight against crime and criminality in the country.
Mm-hmm.
Because what is happening, we're seeing on one hand, the system over the years has co-opted these people who are resistant to the system and seeking honor and fame and recognition
Mm-hmm.
in their resistance. But the system has co-opted them, and it is true that co-opting by the system where some of them actually were able to get the honor. We're talking about in the earlier days when you have the ranking
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
and the Don
Yeah.
and
Games. Yeah.
all of these guys, they gained their recognition because the system made them more palatable to the ordinary Jamaicans, more acceptable. Because if you were a Don in a community and the politician leave you in charge of a certain constituency and a certain area, ordinarily you would not your badness wouldn't have been so widely recognized, right? But now
Mm-hmm.
that you get that wide recognition, you're able to influence a much wider
Mm-hmm.
area and a much wider cross section of people.
Yes,
Now,
but I would say, Lash, that outside of politics, these people had their own spaces of authority and power, of which the political connection was only one. So you have people who will go into we call it singing performance. All right. So you could become a singer. You could become you have other arenas. You go to the track and learn how to bet on horses, or you go to the dance hall and you become a face man, or one of them guys who all the woman them want. That's another form of power. You can go with the whatever subcultural group, Rastafarians, unemployed youth, you play cricket, you play football, you earn a reputation as a baller, you earn a reputation as a whatever. So you have other areas in which these people exercise their own authority, of which the political connection is only one.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah, brother Obika.
Yes, sir.
Um, yeah, I just wanna add my voice to the welcoming of you
Thanks, man. Thanks a lot.
platform. I do have your book. I haven't gotten a chance to read it as yet,
Mm-hmm.
but um, just going along with the discussion, right? What one of the things I noticed at first when I picked up the book is that it seemed to have been more centered around a kind of reporting approach
Mm-hmm.
rather than an analysis. Um, and of course,
Well,
listening.
I do offer several interpretations of what is going on in addition to reporting on it.
Okay,
I offered early on in the book an interpretation of the nature of power in Jamaica, that you cannot understand it simply as a democratic society, because
okay,
it's
okay.
right. And then I offered interpretation of this behavior. What is its significance for the political process in Jamaica and the consequences of this alliance between social outlaws and the political apparatus?
Yes, yes, yes. I'll take that. Like I said, I haven't really read it, but
That's all right. That's all
yeah.
right. That's all right.
What I wanted to zero in on though, right, is you raise a key point, right? Something that is, not only profound, but of significant importance to us, particularly now because it continues to this day, right? In terms of that Eurocentric idealism
Mm-hmm.
that we tend to hold on to,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's not just the so-called powers that be that really carry that, but even right in the most oppressed areas, right, we still retain that because that's the culture that has been shaped for us,
Mm-hmm.
right? And this is where I think, right, where I find fault a lot of times with the progressive movement because they fall short in terms of recognizing this and dealing with it,
Mm-hmm.
right? Can you
Yeah.
expand some more on that?
Yes. In fact, that's my next book.
Okay.
Because I want to look, a lot have been written about the current system and how it got it to be the way it is. And the politicians have rightly taken the beating that they have taken about what a mess they have made of Jamaica's prospects. I want to look at the progressive movement's contribution to our predicament in my next book, and I have already done the research on it, and especially on the WPJ, which is the party that was led by Trevor Monroe, the Communist Party, but not only them. Because one of the things that I discovered, and if you look close enough, is that you have a family quarrel. I'm going to reduce it to its simplest terms. It's a family quarrel going on between the outside middle class, brown middle class, educated middle class, and those who hold political power. It is a well-known phenomenon in post-revolutionary governments. You have the ins and the outs, but they come from the same social class. And one of the unfortunate things about the progressive movement, especially when it talks about socialism and communism, especially in the case of the WPJ, is that they are the mirror opposite of the PNP and JLP in terms of their cultural and political sensibility. What do I mean by that? Well, you like all the Jamaicans say, you exchange black dog for what? Monkey?
You swap black
Yeah,
dog for monkey.
right. So the Norman Manleys and the Bustamantes and all of those guys right down bandwagon with the West as they saw their prospects. And we know what happened after all this time of independence. We bandwagon with the West, we borrow their ideas, we go to their schools and look at the mess that we have. So um, we have a problem with the establishment. But guess what? The people who are who demanded change after independence up until the WPJ have simply offered another version of Western solutions to our local problems. So the socialist movement, the Beng movement, the WPJ, all while well-meaning and clearly want a change in the status quo, have contributed their own additional problems and shortcomings to our solution. I only need to mention race and ethnicity, blackness. All of the progressive movements say that they are for emancipation of black people and that they are for the emancipation of the Jamaican people. But the means by which the progressive movement, maybe I would just maybe say, except for the women's movement, because the women's movement is much more militant and radical than the left wing, male oriented socialist or communist movement in Jamaica. But for the most part, those ideas have been unrealistic, impractical, not recognizing the peculiarities, that is to say, the distinctiveness of the Jamaican experience and how you can bring it out of what the status quo is right now. So the communists offered the Moscow solution, and that is an embarrassment because the Moscow solution, as offering Jamaica the Moscow solution as late as the 1970s, is an embarrassment because Europe had already decided that it don't want that mode of emancipation for itself, but we're gonna pick it up in the communist movement that was begun in the mid 1970s. Then we have the Black Power movement, which is, of course, another expression of progressivism, uh, alternative to the status quo. But if you were to read some of the stuff and look at the history of the worst aspects of the Black Power movement, it verging on ethnic chauvinism. In other words, I mean, the kind of disgraceful attack on Eddie Siaga, racialist attack on Eddie Siaga, or attack on the non-black people of Jamaica is embarrassing. You can still be a respectable black nationalist and not have to cry down people who are not phenotypically dark skinned or people who are what we call Jamaican whites. And certainly, we don't want to attack Eddie Siaga because he's of Lebanese ancestry, because all of us mix up down there. That's part of our modernity. I was telling somebody today that we in Latin America and the Caribbean already have dealt with what America is struggling with right now, how to accommodate ethnic diversity, right? Significant ethnic diversity. Well, we've done past that in the Caribbean already. And one of the things that I said about the worst aspects or the weaknesses in some parts of the Black Power movement, it tends to be chauvinistic, right? And it's not just in Jamaica, it also happened here in the United States where you attack in the because of black pride and you want to defend black people, you go to the other extreme and do the very thing that the whites have done to you.
Uh, One other piece.
Maxine, you want to ask a question? Go ahead.
No, I didn't get the first part of the reasoning. However, what is coming across to me is the economics behind the different views or the different characteristics that is being described. Because generally the black and white or the issue is all driven by economics. And so you pick on certain energies to move forward. What your basic issue is lack of ability to engage the economics of your society. So I understand the prejudices, in how scarce benefits or scarce opportunities are are engaged. But the part that I'm thoughtful of is that any focus on the minority populations of Jamaica, meaning the white, the Chinese, the Lebanese, etc., is not really on color. It is really on they control the economic levers that you, the majority black population, hardly have equal access to. So
Yeah,
that's what I'm.
but remember, Maxine, we're an ex-slave society, we're an ex-colonial society in which ethnicity and race, if you want to call it that, mattered a great deal to the character of inequality. So you're not only poor in material sense of the economic, poor wages, not enough to support yourself. You have meager resources. Very important. But you're also building a society, not just also building an economy. You're building a society. You're building a society in which people are treated or should be treated with mutual respect. But because we're an ex-slave society where we have the color hierarchy, which is also corresponding to the racial hierarchy, then you can't ignore the political and cultural dimensions of economic development.
Yeah, but
Remember,
I don't know how
you're,
to. I
you're
don't know.
talking
I don't
about the
know how to.
lumpen.
Go ahead.
The lumpen. You're talking
What?
about the lumpen.
yes,
That is a segment of this, the lumpen, right?
yes,
That's strata. You're talking about that
yes,
strata. The
yes,
badness and honor is from that strata.
yes.
That's what you're saying, right?
Yes, but remember what I just said
So
earlier. It's not
but
exclusive.
the socialization.
Mhm.
But Obika, if I can
Yes,
say this, because I
Go ahead, no
wanted to do
brother.
a
I'm
follow
listening.
before Mikey jumped in, and it kind of inch on this point now that Mikey is raising in terms of the lumping and so on. When you look at the Jamaican situation, again, it's not one that is unique, right? Because of course, it's something experienced not just throughout other colonial areas in different ways, but
Mhm.
also, right, this was very much the fabric of Europe before they started the Western
Mhm.
colonialization, right? Because violence has always been at the base and has always been their trump move when it comes to interaction, relationships, because that's all Europe did amongst themselves, right? That's their own history. It's not the narrative that they teach us in schools,
Mhm.
right? But
Mhm.
that is exactly the way Europe was, right? They fought amongst themselves more than anything else because
Right, but remember now that fighting resulted in the consolidation of national states. Okay?
yes, yes,
All right. Well, we don't have either the consolidation of national states with that violence from below, nor do we have the use of that violence from below to overturn the society and give us a post-revolutionary place. So it is a kind of frustrated, I'm going to use this word, a frustrated expression of the militancy that is thwarted by the particular form of politics in Jamaica.
well, here's the thing though. You said it results in consolidation of power, but also you got to remember, right? When you look at the numbers on Europe, right? It's not totally that way because when you look at the fact that Europe, for example, is what 44 countries plus territories and all of that, right? Then when you look at the colonial group, right? And even though the colonial group that emerged, right, that really set up colonization in the West, is less than 5%.
No, absolutely. But what fascinates me is that you have social upheaval, you have social violence, but it tends to be more horizontal, meaning that it's against your own kind.
Yes, yes,
Right, against your own kind. It's not being directed against the property groups, the political class, and the people who have the dominant power. So that kind of violence is just instrumentalized. One party tell you must beat up the other guy party member, and vice versa, or you take it out on your ghetto brethren or your neighbor, or engage in some kind of what we call horizontal violence against the people at your level, not
right. But
that
like
way.
you said, it's more the lumpen style because it's not something organized, it's not something ideological,
Right,
right?
right,
So
right.
it has no real direction.
Right, right. And what I was trying to point out is that even though it had no direction, it was sufficiently menacing for the system to say, all right, we're going to harness your misbehavior for our purposes. Now, one of the things that is quiet in all of this discussion is which social class that is downtrodden in Jamaica can carry the transformative change that we hope for and people have been begging for all these years. We don't, the Communist Party of Jamaica under Trevor Monroe said it's the working class. Well, when they tried, they found that that was not the case. The Jamaican working class, either urban or rural, was not interested in communist overthrow of the society.
But
They
it
were
was
not
not a
even,
developed class either.
eh?
It was not even a developed class.
Right, it was not even, but if you were saying historically, who is the agent for transformative change, who have the most to lose, you would say, well, the working class, but it
But
never
it
turned
goes to
out.
your point. It's that borrowing from Europe.
Right, our development is different from theirs.
Yeah.
So if we don't, and I agree, we cannot look to the lumpen to save Jamaica. They can be as militant and them can create as much havoc as they want, and they can create as much beautiful music as they want. They're not going to change the Jamaican form of government. They will change cultural sensibilities and make middle class people want to get more
Absolutely. Absolutely.
rootsy and things like that. But it's not going to change anything that we call politics for the better in Jamaica, right? Because that's what Marx, the term came from Karl Marx, right? And you just say lumpen proletariat, right? They're not a real proletariat. They are the scrapsies that's left behind in terms of class, the scrapsies of class that's left behind. And they are notorious, as we have all know. They will kill you today for $1 if they're on drugs or whatever, things like that. So no, we can't look to them for liberation. And I had actually asked that question. I said, should we be looking to the lumpen to save Jamaica? Do they actually represent a transformative force? And I have to say no.
Who is the we that are looking to the lumpen? Who is the
The
we?
people who study history, the people who are concerned about Jamaica's future, the people who study Jamaican experience, the commentators, journalists, writers, people like us
People who want change.
who want change, yes.
Mhm.
And historically, the force for change in Europe was the working class in alliance with other classes.
But
And
again, too, that still was not a sufficiently developed working class, because it wasn't
right,
even a sufficient to develop capitalist system either.
right, and they had to force feed the revolution in a place like Russia
Yeah,
or for the Soviet Union, force feed it again in Cuba, right? So that might tell us something about our leadership class, right? Because historically, it is political leadership that carry out are at the forefront of social change. And look at what our political leadership class have done with their opportunities since independence. Play games with it. When I run in, you run. When I run out, you run in. Politics. So
yeah,
what I'm saying is that the elephant in the room here now is whether the political leadership from the middle class that can create transformative change. And right now, from what we have seen over the
Yes,
last,
sir.
we can't, the
Yes.
Northwest.
well, what can you say in terms of activism versus politicians,
Well,
or activists versus politicians? Because that is another piece again, which we need to look at in our Jamaican situation.
yeah. Again, I think it was Marx who famously said, "Men make history, but they don't make it by themselves. They make it under the circumstances and contexts which make that history possible." And right now, and not now, right now, since Michael Manley's defeat in 1980, the lesson for all leadership of third world countries is that them have the handle and you have the blade. That's what the current prime minister has pretty much said. We have to go along with the neoliberal agenda, and we have to make people come and buy out and set up businesses at the expense of locals and blah blah blah. Right? So you can only make history under circumstances that is possible. And right now, there is no force on the ground that can carry transformative change. And what people are writing about now is what has happened to Jamaica in the aftermath of the liberation culture that was produced in the 60s and 70s. Liberation culture coming out of the ghetto, liberation coming out culture coming out of the middle class, liberation coming out culture coming out of those people who think about Jamaica's future. We don't have that now. What we have now is a transactional society. Dog eat dog. Every man for himself and every woman for themselves.
Yeah.
There's no.
But
Yeah.
Abika,
Mhm.
that liberation culture wasn't even just generated by circumstances in Jamaica alone
Right.
during that period, because
Yes.
it was mostly generated by the liberation movements
Mhm.
that were taking place around the world at the same time that
Yes.
impacted Jamaica, and Jamaica became a part of that momentum.
Yes.
Giving support to those international movements and sucking in support from those international movements, and then whatever revolutionary thinking was in Jamaica got a boost. And since that time,
Mhm.
since that change globally, that liberation period, that period when a lot of countries were breaking away from
Mhm.
colonialism,
Mhm.
since that period has died. It leaves us thinking, what is going to be that
Alternative system.
catalyst that generates such the kind of momentum in Jamaica to create a class, that liberation class that you talk about again, because it doesn't seem right now that feeling that we can create anything
to break out of the
liberating.
system. Yeah, yeah, and especially if you're a tiny island, you're just a small, tiny actor in the larger global picture. But yes, we were part of the global experience of rebellion, and our middle class people joined that expression of activism. But one of the things that I can say with a certain amount of confidence is that, unlike Cuba, Jamaica does not have a revolutionary martial war fighting tradition.
Because we never got that opportunity for reform.
Um, my explanation is a little different.
No, just
Huh?
just a minute, just a minute.
Okay.
Can you repeat what you just said, my brother? Can you repeat what you just said? That with no fighting class in Jamaica. Yeah, go
Yeah.
ahead.
All right. I wanted to contrast Cuba with Jamaica, right? And I'm just making
Yeah.
an observation that is basically supported by our history. We have people who fight against injustice, riot against injustice, join trade unions against injustice, join political parties, but are not prepared in any of our recent historical 20th century experience to carry out social revolution from below. We have spontaneous riots. We have mass strikes against employers. 1938 is our biggest celebration of resistance, but it was not a revolutionary upheaval. It was a cry for better terms under the wicked colonial system. God save the Queen.
But
These are people.
where do you put the Rasta movement?
The
Where
Rastafarian
do you put the
movement.
Rasta movement?
The Rastafarian movement represents a revolution in consciousness, but not the agent of a social revolution. And when we talk about Cuba, right, Cuba is up the road and Cuba was an inspiration for us. But when you read Cuba's history, Jamaica is no Cuba because
I know because Cuba,
the Jamaican colonial experience is different from the Cuban colonial
Cuba
experience.
going back to Osemarti, Maceo, and all of
Yes,
those.
and because they had a particularly stubborn colonial power in Spain, they had to take up arms, just like people in Angola and Southern Africa, because the Portuguese said, "Not our ass, want to not go break away from us." So the only option the Cubans and the Angolans had was to pick up arms. Well, the British was smarter than
Spanish.
the Portuguese and the Spanish.
Mhm.
Okay, all right, we see the writing on the wall, and we're going to start to give another power to decolonize, and we don't have to take up any arms. So Buster and
So
Mantley say, all you have to do is leave it to me and Norman, and we will bargain on your behalf. You don't have,
exactly. That
you don't have to go out in the street anymore.
that's a classic point, Obika.
Yeah,
Classic point you're making. Because the key to what you're saying right there is the education, the reform of education. Right? We have to have a revolutionary education
yeah, man.
in order to really build
Yeah,
that kind of movement.
right. And I spent some time in the book talking about how we deal with power, since we can't avoid it, or because we are the victims of power. The Jamaican people are the victims of power, and I describe it. Badness is one version. You have you turn yourself into a criminal, a scammer. You look for a visa and leave the damn place. You join up with a political party and get little scrapsies. You form a drug gang, but we're not and you want to go back to Africa. For those of you who still believe that you Africa is your homeland, you want to go back to Africa. That is how we deal with power in Jamaica, and the general name that we all know is Anansiism. Okay, the man have more power than me. All right, him have the guns. Me not have no gun. I go try some Anansiism for him. So me go take your money, PNP and JLP, but you now own me. So again, the point is that not that I want to cast
Let me
aspersions on, Huh?
Go ahead.
No,
Let him
not
finish
that I
making the
want
point.
not that I want to diminish the rebelliousness of the Jamaican people. I just say the point that I'm saying is that the rebelliousness is there, but it's not directed in the way that it ought to have gone, like the Cubans or the other people who have take this thing seriously. We want a visa. We want to wait upon remittances. We want to start a little business, do a little farming. We want and on and on and on. But we don't want get rid of them. And part of the problem is that is because we're also an island. The same man that you are telling me if you go overthrow is him help me get with the school pay the school fee down at school for me. I him did help me get the little apartment down at Tivoli. And you want me to go kill him or overthrow film government? No. It's complicated and it's cross-cutting allegiances. So that's the Jamaican story.
Do you think that part of that
Hold on, last, just stick hold a minute, last. Let me bring Herb now into
Hi, Abika.
Yes, sir.
Herb.
And good
Well,
afternoon to listeners.
Will
Mikey.
just Father Abika and Badness. Sorry you come late, bro, but continue, last.
yeah, I was asking
Yeah, last, go
Abika,
ahead.
do you think the racial divisions in the Jamaican society around the 90 from early and leading up to the 1938 riots, do you think that racial stratification in the society played a part in subduing the revolutionary activities of the workers and the people on the plantations, coming out of the plantations at that time, in terms of the privileges that the brown Jamaicans, the partly white Jamaicans, they had certain privileges and connections to the plantation and to the British system.
Mm-hmm.
And they had the voice which the darker skinned Jamaicans did not have.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was it almost fell on them to speak on behalf of the other cultural groups.
Yeah, and the workers and the Jamaican people broadly. Yeah, you can't discount it, but I think in that particular case, it was more class than race that was going to determine how the transition to independence was going to happen. And if you read the research, both Bustamante and Mike Norman agreed with the British that there will be no disorderly transition after we settle after we bargain with you about the trade union being legalized, the improvement in wages, and all of these other, and that you're going to hand over independence down the line. It was mainly class, although you never discount ethnicity and race in these multiracial societies, because the very people who were representing the middle class were also people of light skin color and or brown.
The reason I raised that was when you contrast William Grant's activities in the trade union movement against Buster's activities in the trade union movement. Buster could bare his chest and say, shoot me. William Grant, on the other hand, could not take such a position because it would be easy for a black policeman to shoot him down. It would not be easy for a black policeman to shoot Buster, who was racially connected to the ruling class in the country. And
Yes.
so people were more willing to listen to a Bustamante and a Norman Manley because of the privileges they had in talking to the rulers, the British colonialists at the time. And so their standing in the society was much greater, even though at times the roles that they played weren't as great as people on the ground, like a William Grant and a Marcus Garvey and those kind of people.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. And you just made the point that it's their class position. They shared a lot as a member of a class with the former colonial people. They had lots in common with them. And both Manley and Norman and Bustamante sang the praises of the colonial system.
If I can interject, Mike, am I good now?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
Currently, Abika, it appears the United States wants Jamaica to play the same role regionally as they have the UK playing in Europe and Israel plays in the Middle East.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, Jamaica is supposed to be superior education-wise, population-wise to the English-speaking CARICOM.
Mm-hmm.
And as such, they would like to see, and you see it in the breaks Jamaica is getting. Jamaica is not being bothered right now because of the Cuban doctors and nurses on the island. And what I'm talking about is the form of regional integration that they want Jamaica to take on.
Mm-hmm.
Right? They want Jamaica to set the example
Mm-hmm.
for the rest of the Caribbean to follow. And so
By
they
doing
would
what? By doing what? By doing what?
by being pro-US.
But we've never been anti-US, except a brief period on Michael.
Well, are we pro-US now with the Chinese giving us as much as they have given us? Because the US is trying to keep Jamaica in its corner.
Right. But we have not been hostile to the United States. In fact, ever since the return of Eddie Seaga after that defeat, the Jamaican position has always been still aligned with the United States. We have had to diversify our economic partners because it was to our interest to do that, but it was not because of anti-Americanism. You'll agree.
Okay.
Yeah.
However, at this point, Jamaica has a decision to make because the US has not contributed as much, not even half as much or a third as much as China has in recent times.
Right.
With infrastructure
Right.
and with the future how can I say build up that Jamaica needs.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. It's the Americans trying to catch up where the Chinese stepped in to fill the vacuum of American economic aid, because even though there's a Chinese institute to learn Chinese at UA, there's an institute for study of China's culture and language. Jamaicans have very little interest in China and are even openly hostile to the Chinese presence in Jamaica, as you know.
Yep.
Right? So there's no great cultural contact between China and Jamaica other than the economic. And if you see some of these Chinese wholesalers behave in the slums of downtown Jamaica to the ruffians who come into their stores, it shows you that these people are like not afraid of us and our legendary militancy. You ever see any of those
There are several videos that have gone
where they insult and chase
Yeah,
Jamaicans out of the store and cuss them off in patois and all of that. So the American fear that Jamaica is going to become closer to China is just a mirage. China has an economic interest in competing with the United States, and
It's like the communist bogey.
yeah, well, not even that anymore. They can. It's all about spheres of influence, right? And the Chinese have outflanked the Americans with infrastructure, loans, and with technological innovation at home in China and elsewhere. So the United States is just trying to do catch up and say, don't make China get too big a foot in your country because we may not like it. And if you do it too much, you might lose some benefits from us.
But as somebody in Jamaica, do you think that the US has indicated that economically it's ready to put out investments in Jamaica, considering the crime, considering the various upheavals we have had?
Yeah, man, you heard the man say America first. Okay?
All right.
So we're not worried. Him taking back away all the money from USAID, all Jamaica going to do is suffer because all of that money not only going into the poorer neighborhoods, but going into the pockets of the middle class who run USAID in Jamaica,
Mm-hmm.
right? So no, United States is not concerned about Jamaica's welfare. It's all about American strategic power in Latin America and the Caribbean, and elsewhere. So they were caught flat-footed with the technological supremacy that the Chinese have acquired. The Chinese are on the moon. India is on the moon, right? So the vaunted American century is over, my friend, right? It was over beginning in the 1970s. And now we're at the point where we have a wannabe strongman offering these mirage solution to the country's deep problems.
So Jamaica will be at a standstill then.
John,
No, Jamaica will continue to
John,
do what
let
Jamaica
me
does.
finish.
Go ahead, John.
Yes, I find this discussion very interesting because I don't know if I agree with Abika, but I'm listening to him carefully.
And what don't you agree,
And
John?
eh?
What don't you agree with?
Wait a man, let me explain. I said I don't know if because in a way it's abstract. The concept of a liberation class. I mean, we can dispute about which is right, which is wrong. I'm looking at the region and the world. And what I am seeing is even if we didn't have the Cuban experience, what we do not know, what we do know and we are aware of is the battering that Cuba has undergone for being what they are. Every single person in the Caribbean know that. Every Jamaican know that. We also observe the battering that Venezuela is going down with. The president of Venezuela have a price on him head to Ross. You ever hear that? $25 million, $25 million for being a president of a country because you don't support the United States. So when I think about liberation, we have to have a goal. Liberation means that we are going to bring about social change and upheaval. And
But not necessarily, John.
wait. Let me make my point. Otherwise, I'm going to lose my thoughts.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So for me, a big factor, even more than I originally used to think, when I put the dots together, is the way the world is look in the period when there's no more counterbalance to the American power. These things come to an end. They either get squashed, the ones that exist are being squeezed, people are migrating. You talk about visa and so on. It is a natural thing. All the Venezuelans who come here. who are being sent back home. Venezuela has been drained of their middle class, whether they like it or not. They are under permanent, constant war by the American government. And now this government say, you know, you can't relate to China. Get rid of the same thing him do with the Panama Canal.
Yeah.
Same thing. Him frighten everybody and you have to come in line. So what Herb is saying is true. But my thing is, liberation don't take place in a vacuum. Liberation has a goal. And the question that you have to face in the world for the next 10 years, I think, for the next 10 years, is that there is no counterbalance. We're going to be at a disadvantage. So well and good the Chinese have economic power. They do not have military power. And therefore, they don't have the same military power. That's an illusion, because what they have is manpower. They don't have the ships, they don't have the navy, they don't have the air force.
But they're coming along, John.
They are coming along. That's why I said the next 10 years. They are coming along. They can protect themselves, but they cannot offer the counterbalance to imperialism at the present time. So I'm not saying you must sit down and wait, but it's clear that this element, the so-called balance of forces in the world, is a critical factor which gives more, it's something to consider.
But look, John,
I put more store on it than I did 10 years ago.
That you're right. Balance of power can help countries that are less powerful maneuver, which is what Michael Manley tried to do. But you don't also only have to have balance of power. You can have breakdown of the hegemon. And the hegemon has broken down at home and has been weakened abroad. This is another opportunity for maneuver, right? So there's no Soviet Union, but we have the alternative to the World Bank and to the IMF forming, right?
Forming.
You know, we have them in regions. There's one in Asia, there's one in sub-Saharan Africa, and there's one in the Americas. And then, of course, the Brazilian, effort to transcend the financial institutions. So you don't have to have a hegemon, a counter hegemon to get a third, for you to have a maneuver, to be able to maneuver. And that's what Jamaica has done. Okay, we're going to maneuver and get help from the Chinese. We're going to maneuver and get help from the Cubans. We're going to continue to get help from America, but you won't be any self-respecting sovereign nation. We'll have to look for other partners. It's not an anti-American.
But the people that are doing it are not, they are not the liberation class.
I agree with you, right?
So it's not really about liberating. Those changes don't trickle down to the masses.
Right.
They do not. And the other thing is, look at Brazil. Brazil is a big Ross country, right? With significant resources.
Right.
And it's like it's the third or fourth biggest country, significant resources, positioning itself under a kind of leadership where it's the odd, it's the exception rather than the rule of the South, the countries of the South who are near to the United States. This is not Africa. Africa have a certain possibility with in Southern Africa because of the distance and the difficulty that the Americans would have to extend the control that they do. But they are squeezing every bone in the middle, in the Latin American region, And the example I give is Venezuela, where it's just relentless.
Yeah, but
Way that
again,
only a man with backbone. And even when you have backbone, you are constantly
but I have a
under
question.
pressure. I'm not saying it can't be done. Don't misunderstand. I'm just saying that the failure,
I
sorry, the failure of the liberation classes, the people who can give leadership and so on, I think has a lot to do with the balance of forces where we are in the region, and the fact that you know, and you know, it's an interesting time because the counterbalance is almost balanced. That's what I'm saying.
who's the counterbalance to American power now?
The BRICS is the
Right.
counterbalance,
Yeah.
and the BRICS is almost even, and the BRICS is saying let's have our own currency.
Yeah, but they
Let's
haven't called,
do
yeah, but they still can't call the shot. It's just, they're not able to call the financial shots yet. They're
no exact.
they're doing so.
I'm agree. That's my point.
Yeah, but that's the
The
point that I was
IMF still
making to
run
you, John.
things,
That's
eh?
the point. That's the point that I had just made to you, that it is gave the BRICS and other regional economic organizations in the South have offered poorer South states options other than looking to the United States, and that's what the United States is now worried about. That their previous
and
clients are
how does
turning,
that,
huh?
Obika,
Yes.
with all of this discussion, how does that undermine badness and honor in Jamaica? Because that's the issue.
It does not undermine what has happened in Jamaica now. In fact, I'm reading reviewing a manuscript that talks about what neoliberalism has done to Jamaican culture. And the argument is basically that rather than making people become more conscious of social improvement, people have become consciousness of their precarity, the fact that they don't have enough, they're not sure about tomorrow, and so the hustling mentality has completely taken over the mindset, that it is not no longer a collective condition that we need to share in the effort to correct it. It's every man for himself, every woman for herself. And the Jamaican government is encouraging that by saying we can't do anything about this situation because we are either powerless or it's a natural situation that we have to accommodate. Neoliberalism. And the culture of neoliberalism is what we're seeing now in the anarchic response to uncertainty, because that's what it really is. It's economic uncertainty. You don't know what crisis is going to happen next. You don't know whether the remittances will come in on time, because we're catching hell up here in North America too, right? And so that sense of precariousness, uncertainty, and layoffs, the threat. You see, what has happened, is that neoliberalism has acted as a cultural force as well as an economic force in the places where it's dominant. And Jamaica is one of those places where the culture of neoliberalism, anarchic, nihilistic, hopelessness, looking for an opportunity to carry out a transactional
Explain
relationship.
that.
Hmm?
You need to define what I think what Nita is saying, and I understand what you're saying, but I think for the public, when you say
Okay. Well,
neoliberalism,
right,
what
oh, well,
exactly do you mean?
I'm talking about the economic order that now governs America and governs the world for the most part, which
You
is
mean the two-party system?
no. I'm sorry. I'm referring to an economic order that they call neoliberal, right? And that came was developed in the late 1970s and is now the standard for economic trade and international economic relations. Namely, that open markets, no constraints on foreign investment,
U.S. foreign investment,
U.S. foreign investment, right?
IMF, IMF.
IMF, right? If you want to trade with me, you can block your my imports into your country, and or else I will put tariffs on your exports. And because I'm a more efficient producer than you, it'll be good for your consumers to buy their onions and potatoes from me than from your inefficient farmers. And besides, the consumer likes it because the prices are less. So when we use the term neoliberalism, we're just talking about a kind of economic order where you are forced to open your markets and not protect your domestic markets for fear of economic punishment from the bigger players in the economy.
But it also comes with a political system.
Not necessarily, because I would say that China has a neoliberal economy, but they have a political system that can protect them where Jamaica cannot.
Yes, but the difference is that, I mean, what is it that Rubio is saying to the Caribbean now? He's saying, come off of China, the China wagon. Stop
Yeah,
dealing with
but,
China. Stop bring the Cuban doctor.
yeah, but
Or
that is
else we, or else we shut down your tourism.
right. Well, that is why the global south, the southern countries have to come up with a united response to this blackmail, because it's political blackmail that they're saying. Not only on, you see, it's funny. It used to be that if you were aligned with Castro's Cuba, you were seen as aligning with communists in the Cold War. No, the stigma,
Exactly. No more Cold War.
right? So we don't have any
Like,
more Cold War, right? Because the
yeah,
United
but
States. No, let me make the point. So that, so that it's not ideological anymore. It's just who gets to have the greatest share of the world economy, and the Chinese are taking our share away in Latin America and Caribbean. We want our shares back, but it has nothing to do with ideology. It has to do with statecraft and shares of the world's economy. So
the
it's not.
hostility to the Chinese stems from the fact that they have a different political, or the opposite political system in the minds of the ruling class in the United States. That's how this China is not seen as a capitalist country, even though they run a capitalist economic system.
Yeah, yeah.
It is seen as a communist country.
Well, only by people who don't look at how the world has changed around them. China is not your classic communist country anymore.
No, it's long
Okay.
right, but I'm just saying it. The
Right, right,
hostility
right. But
stems
again,
from
the opposition to Jamaica and the Caribbean involving ourselves with trade in China, it doesn't have anything to do with ideology. It has to do with market shares.
right.
Yeah,
I'm not disagreeing with you.
yeah. No, no, I understand that. But I don't. You were saying earlier that you had some disagreement with my formulation of some things that I said.
No, I was speaking more in terms of the factors, internal factors, because the difficulty, I'm listening to you and I'm thinking about what is being said, and therefore,
Well, I
no,
remember you taking you. I remember you taking issue with my description of the Jamaican militancy, and I saying there's no revolutionary militancy in our 20th century history, political history. We have had, 1938 is our biggest celebration in terms of how we responded to colonial domination. Man, get up and burn sugar cane, burn down buildings, walk off the job, demand better wages, and so on. But that's not, as admirable as it is not revolutionary activity. And it cannot be compared with the Cuban experience. So, what I am saying in a sense is that the progressive movement in Jamaica wanted to go where Cuba went, but we don't have the resources either in terms of consciousness, in terms of our political history in terms of our political leadership. We don't have that Cuban experience. And so, what I am saying is that the progressive movement that offers socialism, offered communism, offered progressive policies, didn't do so by looking closely at the Jamaican potential for any of these things. And what I'm saying is that we couldn't go where Cuba went. It was not part of our historical evolution to go where Cuba went, although we had many people who would have loved to go there.
Yes, but
So
what I
do
would
you think the
sorry.
capacity of do you think the capacity of the economy of Jamaica? Because I'm thinking that Cuba was considered the breadbasket of the Caribbean and had or has a larger internal um, economic. I don't know. I'm just going
Yeah.
back into my mind as
Hmm.
to the capacity of a Jamaica or even a smaller islands in the Caribbean, the capacity to be self-sufficient. When I say self-sufficient, like have an economy that manufactures, that exports, that like when they talk about the countries in I forgot the country in Asia that we should be able to
Yeah, import what?
develop.
They call it. They used to call it
No,
import substitution, industrialization, right? Which is what we
right.
attempted, right? We attempted
Yeah, yeah, but
that.
we can't. What I'm saying, the dynamics of our size and our population at the moment, more Jamaicans based on the migration acts and the migrate and the demand for labor in whether it was England, America, Canada, right?
Uh-huh.
It pulled like it drained our economies, of the mines and the workers are, at that level
Yeah, it was
of
exploitative.
development. So I'm saying, is it a fool's wish to say that your so-called state that they gave you independence about, like your independent state,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
That the actual factors of your state, geographic size, etc., it doesn't allow for economic independence because you will not become a manufacturer and a supplier to world markets. You will become a consumer. And once you're a consumption economy and in the world economic system, how can you exercise independence? If
Well,
I'm looking at China, for instance, when the Chinese, the biggest problem that they have is when the Chinese no longer had this unitary communist thing where, oh, everybody wear one shoes, one type of thing, is it
And the
non-materialistic,
Mao
etc.
Zedong suit.
Right. So now that once they said, oh, um, China, you must become democratic, you must allow your people to exercise their individualism, etc., whatever. It opens such a consumption billion of people marketplace that they themselves could start to manufacture, develop, and compete with the goods and services that were being promoted by the West. You understand? And
I'm
and
telling you.
now, huh? So I'm
Yes, you're
I'm
right.
saying now when you're asking about the revolutionary capacity of Jamaica and where we would have to go, there's nothing in terms of our size, and even at this moment where we have more of our population in these countries than and still going there, because even though they're pushing out people, I don't think legal migration is being stopped. They said they're moving it from a green card to a gold card. So they want a more educated or a more
They want to
type
reduce.
of people. No, no, it's not a reduce. What I'm saying, they're still coming for our brains. The people that would develop our economies. And we can't pay the teacher, we can't pay the nurse, we can't pay our educated class who now are still going to be asked, as much as they're talking about Cuban doctor, etc., etc. How many of our nurse? Why do we need Cuban doctors in relation to the amount of trained Jamaican nurses and teachers and whatever that are leaving the country?
Well, that's a problem. But you know, every country has to decide what its development strategy will be when it gets autonomy from the former colonial power. And import substitution industrialization was one thing that was discussed, but it didn't go very far because we didn't have the manpower and the training, and we didn't have the scale. So export promotion on the basis of what they call comparative advantage, right? We have bananas and sugar and they do not, or we have more of it, or bauxite. And so that's the strategy that we adopted. But when prices changed for, industrial goods versus agricultural good, we got screwed in the 70s, especially after OPEC. So one of the things that we have to reflect on is whether revolution should have been the agenda that our elites, our counter elites, were discussing, instead of some other alternative strategy than the basic one of bandwagoning with the West and trading with them at a on the conditions of disadvantage. And we never really, the elites never really discussed that much after after the failure of import substitution industrialization in Jamaica. We end up with the same kind of thing: export promotion, and a little bit of tourism is now the cutting edge. So that's our competitive advantage. We have beach and sunshine that can earn more money than banana and sugar and bauxite. So that's what we're doing now. I'm borrowing. I forgot to mention heavy borrowing.
I'm wondering if, knowing the economic part, not the historical
So
part. No, what I'm saying, if every product that I create in Jamaica, I'm in the music industry,
Hmm.
right? And I know that the whole economy of the music industry is in America. So if I'm investing now as a country in my cultural enterprise, it is not about me being able to support my product and services. My product and services are highly, highly now dependent and integrated into these countries,
Hmm.
right? So the revolution that you speak of in understanding how integrated we are into these economies, not the political
Yeah, no, no, you.
maneuvering that we do. But what we create, look at the ganja industry. We thought we had a ganja industry. No, and that we were unique and all of these things. And what is happening now? Barrels of ganja are coming in from Canada and wherever to be sold in Jamaica, whether you call it the same import substitution. But where is the will? Where is the what are you talking about in terms of what can we do when we are so integrated? I don't know about any other country, but
Yeah.
I know about Jamaica is integrated economically
Yes.
into the United States.
And the
So
world economy, broadly speaking. Yeah. But you know something? As I said, I think it was a disservice to our development prospects for us to off the opposition, the radical opposition, to offer socialism or social revolution as an alternative to the existing situation. I'm going to go out on a limb and say that yes, when we got independence, all of the institutions were conditioned by the colonial power, and we were handed a set of institutions that we did not build and was used for our exploitation. But it had some positive features to it, one of which was the democratic exchange of power. Because
Oh,
as bad as the British were to us, they wanted democracy for white people um, in Jamaica when they were in power. Then they said the black people can get democracy now, also after we leave. Well, that wasn't a half bad thing if you really look back at it. To consider the alternatives that were going on elsewhere in the non-Western world, military coups, dictatorships, social insurgency, violence, and so on. So the idea that we should have overthrown the democratic constitutional order that we inherited from the British was a disservice to our development prospects, because we could have improved on that, made it more, even more, um, uh, or less unequal, if we had a mind to doing so. But the choices that we were left with, certainly by the late 60s, was we have to continue with Babylon or we have to overthrow Babylon. And I think those kinds of extremism didn't do us any favors.
yeah. Well, and this is why now, even me as a practicing
Bro,
business person and a practicing Rastafarian,
Hmm.
when I understand what the elders of the faith were talking about back to Africa, I realized they weren't really talking, even though in a practical level it was the movement of the people, but in the real level it was the economics of what a back to Africa would have meant
Yeah,
in
it's
terms
about
of
the
aligning, in terms of alignment with states that would have put you in a union of some kind with
yeah.
states that had resources
Well,
and
we
were
tried that.
in,
Remember, we tried that.
which is what they're trying now. What I'm saying is what
Yeah.
they, I see the whole thing with the AU, the sixth region. I see all these activisms of alignment because we have a shared historical circumstance, and that we can be of benefit because of the historical circumstances, that we are now trained, or we can return our brains that have been drained back to our countries to get our people to say, sacrifice the benefits accruing to you in the metropolitan states, and come back home and build your country.
Mhm.
I mean, that is the biggest problem that we have. That
Well,
our brain, the
again,
brain drain
again,
out of the south is immense.
again, you are talking over over a very important issue, and that is political leadership. The vision of the country, right, could have been much more, how should I say, much more oriented to educating the people, because you cannot participate in the world economy with people who can't read, who can't come out of school with literacy, who don't have more additional skills between, besides reading and writing. So we didn't have a national policy for the population. Yeah, we had we
Why we didn't have it?
because
You said the political leadership
the
did not
political
believe in the people.
well,
Yeah, all
obviously,
right. I see you over there in a little.
if
Well, more
I
than
mean,
that, actually.
go ahead.
Well, I mean, we talked about all of this earlier on, and I think you made the points quite clearly in terms of looking at our experiences at the time, right? And even up until now, where we have that ecos Eurocentric um, dominance,
Hmm.
right? Which played a role of directing us, right? We had nothing to look at, nothing to to learn, no experiences to learn from, right? Because we were people who were so dominated that even the very culture was something which we were trying to shape, because we were so far removed from our own original culture. right?
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
so it was all these number of factors, which, of course, I don't want to go back over all of them, but you did raise them earlier on, right? So
Right,
even when Maxine speaks about the Back to Africa movement and so on, that was really a matter of really yearning for something different, right?
right,
More than an ideology of sorts.
right. And it wasn't meant to be literal. I mean, yes,
Right,
you had the purist Rastafarians who said, we're going to go back to Ethiopia, we're going to set up our little town or village or whatever the place in Ethiopia name. What name again? With the Rastafarians?
Ashamani.
Yeah, Shamani, right.
oh,
But it was really meant to be a wholesale migration of Jamaicans to Africa because that was never going to happen outside of the purist, again, Orthodox Rastas. So in economics, they talk about comparative advantage and competitive advantage, right? Comparative advantage is when you have bananas and somebody else don't have it. You have bauxite, somebody else don't have it. All right. So you can use that. But as more and more people have the same thing that you have, your comparative advantage goes down, as we know. Um, and the
also the piece which you mentioned about the Nazism.
what about it?
No, that even that in itself, stands as an obstacle to our
Oh,
progress.
of course it right. But again, it comes out of a historical context, enslavement. All right. So trickery becomes a strategy of survival, right? It's not always meant to do harm. It was
Right,
developed out of survival against unequal odds. But then when it becomes a habitual strategy of dealing with um, inequality of one kind or another, and you start taking advantage of and becomes a way of life, then all bets are off. And celebrate it. And when it's
Abika, let me
celebrated,
ask you this.
yeah,
Most folks
yeah, you're
just
Mikey.
now, they're not in support of badness. Most Jamaicans.
right,
I'm
right.
saying that most Jamaicans are not in support are not in support of badness.
I
So the
agree. And
question
even
for
even
you
even
is
when
how
badness was
do
going
we
on,
dis- how do we dismantle badness?
that's an excellent question. Well, as you know, the Jamaican
How do
government
we yeah.
the Jamaican government has failed in a tremendous attempt to undo it. You remember the whole values and attitude campaign? Remember that? Well, anyway, under PJ,
Yeah.
uh, and the
Yeah,
PNP was
yeah.
deep in this. It was called values and attitudes. That we had bad values and attitudes, and not just the lumpen. No, it had become contaminated the rest of the society, right? Um, so they tried what I call moral suasion, right? Appeal to your conscience. All right. Beg on us, stop killing yourself, make we do things productively, jointly. Let's lift up Jamaica. Moral suasion, moral persuasion. All right. Well, that didn't work because I can't pay your bills. Okay. That doesn't provide employment. The Jamaican government didn't say that we want to do, but we want to fix badness in Jamaica. And in addition to moral appeals, we're going to try to get money to create jobs on a mass level or create an industry on a broad level that can have side effects outside of the main industry, spin off, right? No, they only said, behave with yourself, no man. It looked bad. Want to stop it. But it didn't translate to being on the ground in any meaningful sense. And when you're talking about persuading people to be not
On that
corrupt
note,
and
brother man,
you engaging in the corruption yourself, right? Getting your skimming the foreign contracts and getting your mansion. You only have turned prime minister for less than 2 years and you already have mansion up at the hilltop. Where the money come from? So you cannot talk to me about badness and respect. So that is the story of the attempt, the failed attempt because it don't have no other thing other than a bag of mouth, as the man them say. So yeah, to answer your question, which is a very important,
Brother Abika,
how have countries dealt with outlawry of one kind or another, right? Well, you have terrorism, where man just take up a
yes.
gun and start fire shot or assassinate leaders. You have the jihadist expression in the Middle East and elsewhere. How those armed forms are easily put down. You just send out some squaddy and put it down. Far more difficult is how to repair the moral culture of a place where the cultural decay is so extensive that it cuts across all major institutions, contaminated the class values of all the class, from the lowest class person to the very top. Everybody participating in some form of corruption or another. That is much more difficult. And in these examples, the only successful examples that I see are the authoritarian ones on behalf of a cleaning up of the society, cleaning up. So in Singapore, the Jamaicans are very love to say, "Oh, can we be like Singapore?" And Singapore is such a great role model for us. Well, one of the things we could borrow from Singapore is a crackdown on elite corruption. Don't start at the bottom, because when you start at the bottom, people will think that you're just picking on them. Pick on the people in your upper class and your class backing, put them in jail, bring charges against them. Then people will take you seriously. But if you only go and talk about the corruption of the poor and the corruption of the unemployed, you're not going to get very far.
But you also have another piece to that.
What's
right?
that?
Which is to really deal with the conscious side. Stop seeing politicians as saviors.
That's true.
Stop looking for politicians being saviors.
That is true.
Right? Stop looking to politicians for solutions.
Right. But you have to set an example to begin with. No, the politicians are not the answer, but you have to begin with the leadership. And if the leadership is seen as corrupt and rotten and hypocritical, then you're not going to get very far. So you have to start with the elite group. So far, we have not seen anyone other than Michael Manley come out against the leadership, the elite group, his own people. That's why they hated him so much. So much, they hated him for any number of reasons that we know. But one of them is a class traitor. He was seen as a class traitor. And that's what Fanon and some of these thinkers write about. You have to have somebody within the group who are saying enough is enough, and we're going to set a better example than we have, and it's going to mean that some of you guys have to get off this train. Or you can have a man who thief light bulb from.
Would this be Mark Golding?
No, the guy who stole the light bulb from Cuba and never got. They dragged out. Huh?
Yeah.
Yeah, they dragged out his case until they got it thrown out. All right, and the PNP said that man is all right with us up to a point. We don't agree with the thievery, but he's a PNP man still.
But Abika, that's going on right now.
That's what I'm saying, right? I give you
that's going on. What's the guy from the Ministry of Education whose case has never come up?
Right.
The one from the doctor man from the Energy Ministry.
Right.
Who sell off all that oil.
Yeah.
And he had to be dismissed. And his case
and then come back in a power.
The very DPP herself who messed up the judge, caused him to have to retire.
Yes.
And nobody charged her with anything.
And the Prime Minister to this day has not filed his forms declaring where the money from.
There you go.
All right. So you leave the people them alone. Fix your class.
Gentlemen, we have come to the time where we say we wrap it up. Brother Abika, I really want to thank you for this informative discussion.
Come on, good discussion.
The listeners learn something.
Thanks for coming.
Yes,
good discussion. And this platform is open to you, So whenever
whenever time
again,
to talk about the radical intellectuals and their mistakes as well as
Yes,
achievements in
yes, I
Jamaica.
would love to have that discussion.
I'm
Yes.
Also,
looking forward to that
let's
book.
talk
Looking
about
forward
that.
to that book.
You know?
Yes, yes. As I get
Yes.
along a little further, I will
So
let you guys know.
again, all right. So, gentlemen, thank you all for a wonderful discussion, and I hope the listeners enjoy it. Please remember, we meet every Sunday at 4 o'clock, and we call this Waterhouse Vibes.
Who are you
So
having next week?
until next week, what good? We're not sure. You want to? We can book you right now. Talk
No,
about the
no, no, no,
badness
no, no. I was just curious to
for
know
next week.
who's coming up next, but it's okay. I will keep tabs on you on your
Yeah.
side. Much
Thank you,
appreciated, gentlemen.
brother,
Appreciate
man.
this
Be
stimulating
good.
content.
Yeah, we
And
appreciate
allows
you
me
as
to-
well. Thank
Yes.
you.
Thanks a lot, man. Thanks.
I just want to clarify one thing, Abika. Radical intellectual, are you going to include Garvey and Dr. Rodney? You're going all the way back
I'm
out.
I'm
Yes.
actually going only the post-colonial one, so I'm going to talk about Rodney. I have the names up here: Rodney, Monroe, Beckford, Sylvia Winter, Lloyd Best. You know those names, right?
I,
Yeah.
Yeah.
right, right.
Yes. Yeah.
Not
Yes.
all of them are communists, but they are for transformative change in Jamaica.
It, okay, well, it would be good if you could put the names in the private chat, so we do our research and come.
Right.